Welcome to The Inspired Creative, the podcast for people who need a little help getting inspired or staying motivated to explore their creative side. My name is Paula Castle, and I want to start by saying hello and welcome to the show, everybody. I apologize that this episode is coming out a little later than it normally would. I normally get the episodes out on Wednesdays. This week, I had some technical difficulties, and I actually ended up having to completely re-record the episode. So I don't mind. It's not that big a deal, but obviously it means that instead of coming out on Wednesday, it came out on Thursday this week. I don't expect that to be a regular thing, so I do apologize. But without any further ado, I think it's probably good for us to just jump right into the topic because I've got a lot to say today. And we always start every episode with a quote. And today's quote is by Thomas Keller. And he said, "I think that you've got to make something that pleases you and hope that other people feel the same way." And I love this quote. I always love my quotes, so I think I say that every week, but I genuinely love this quote because it's such a central tenet for anyone who wants to create something that's meaningful, for anyone who wants to create something that's inspiring. It is one of these core things, these fundamental principles, that we have to make something that we love. If we're not making things that we like, I don't know why we expect other people to like them. But the truth is that sometimes we as artists, we as creative people, or maybe we are non-creative people who are attempting creative works, get a little lost. And instead of focusing on what makes us happy, instead of focusing on what moves us, instead of focusing on the things that we're naturally drawn to, sometimes we wander off course and we start making things for other reasons. And I'm not saying that having another reason to make something is bad. If you're making something for someone else, specific, maybe you're making a gift, maybe you're making someone a quilt, or you're making someone a painting. I had a friend who got one of their wedding pictures was made into a painting. A friend of theirs did it for them for their wedding. You know, there are times when you are making something specifically for an individual, and if you know them well enough and you know their tastes, then it's of course natural to make something that they will love, something that will please them. But when we're making art in general, and when we're creating for pretty much any other reason, even if that reason is for consumption, even if it's for other people to see or use or enjoy or purchase, it's very important for us to remain rooted and established in the things that drive us, in the things that give us passion, in the things that we're really motivated for. And I think sometimes that gets a little lost in the sauce, for lack of a better term. Now, here's why. I was sitting and I was thinking about it, and I don't feel like I have all the answers. So I just said, here's why, in a very authoritative way. I'm not an expert. This is just the opinion that I came up with when I was sitting and thinking about it, because we think about the reasons that people create art, and especially if they're creating art for other people. Sometimes we create for completely personal reasons. It's not meant to be shared. We make something for ourselves. We make something for our families. We make something for a very close-knit group of people. And we don't really need to care if the public likes it. We don't really have to consider what's popular these days. We don't have to put any thought into whether other people are going to want it or appreciate it, because we're making it because we appreciate it. And I think that that is the place where we are often most safe and most secure in making things that we love, because if we're making it for us, we will make things that we will appreciate once they're finished, right? But then there are maybe a couple of other stages along this way, especially if we are creating art for other people. So maybe you own an Etsy shop, or maybe you are a painter and you have, art that you want to put on display or sell at galleries, or maybe you write music that you want the public to hear, or maybe you are a performer or an actor and you're trying to fill roles and you want to make a living off of your art. Whatever the reasons are, maybe you're a baker or a photographer and you want to be able to make a living off of your skill and off of your talent. When we are in that place, and I don't really think it matters how far along or how successful we are in that place, we have to consider, maybe not be motivated by, but at least consider that other people will need to be able to see or hear and appreciate and connect with what we've done, because that is the purpose of communal art, right? When we make something for other people, we want it to evoke something in them. We want them to enjoy it, or we want them to be moved by it, or we want it to provoke them, or we want them to feel something. That is the beauty of art, because art can transcend barriers and languages and races and differences of culture and all of these other things that can keep people divided so often, and can really speak to people on a global level. Whether it's a brownie that everybody loves, because how can you not like chocolate? Or if it's a song that even if you don't understand the words, you're moved by the feel of it and the sound of it, or an acting performance, or a painting, or whatever it is. When we are creating art that we want other people to know and appreciate, we want to give them something. That's the purpose of the art. But in doing that, I think sometimes we get a little, I want to say, we overstep the line. Does that make sense? Where it stops being about making things that move them the way that we want them to be moved, and it starts being about making things that we think people will like. And even if we're not, let's say, selling our art on Etsy. Let's just use that as an example. Like, say you're a quilter, I can speak to that from personal experience, and you're making quilts and you want to sell them. Sometimes people get a little wrapped up in making sure that what they're producing is what's popular, what's hot, what's selling, right? It's very, I don't want to say rare, but it's very common for musicians or artists or bands to fall into genres that are especially popular, that are played a lot on the radio, that get a lot of airtime, that get, a lot of plays on YouTube or whatever it is, because we want our art to be consumed. We want it to be appreciated. We want it to be loved. But the pitfall in that, and it's not always an automatic, but one of the dangers is that if we get so focused on making things that other people love, sometimes we lose the passion and the drive that comes with making something that we love. And that's why I love this quote so much, because Thomas Keller, when he's saying this, is reminding us of where this has to start. Of course, we want to make something that is consumable. Of course, we want something to be, the end result of our work to be something that others can appreciate. But that doesn't mean that we should let go of the core. It doesn't mean that we should let go of the center. It doesn't mean we should let go of the thing inside us that drives us to create. So before we make it so that other people will love it, the first thing we have to ask ourselves is this something I love? Because if it's not something that we love, and it's not something that we're passionate about, then what are we really going to be conveying in our art? What are we going to be passing on to the person who sees it, or the person who hears it, or the person who experiences it, if it isn't coming from a place of truth in our own life? And so I think that it's really important for us every once in a while, no matter where we are on the spectrum, no matter how creative we're feeling that day, or no matter how successful we've been in our skill or our art or our talent, that every once in a while we take a moment to just stop and pause and ask ourselves, am I doing what brings me joy? Am I doing something that brings me passion? Am I doing it because I want to do it, or am I doing it because I feel like this is what people want? And it's funny, because when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about some of my friends who are artists and musicians, and they're very talented. And I have one friend who's a blogger and a photographer, and she's got a great Instagram account and all these things. And I was having a conversation with her, and she was telling me the everything that goes into all this that you don't really see, the photography sessions and the editing that happens and the planning ahead and making sure that everything that she does on her platform is stylized in a specific way and creates a unified message. And it was really beautiful. But then she started talking about what gets the most likes, what gets the most retweets, what gets the most, what's most popular on Facebook and what's most popular on Instagram. And it was a fascinating conversation, and a very real and important conversation to have. And through all of the things that she was saying, she never stopped saying, and I love. And I love when people like this. And I love when I'm able to make my vision come true. And I love when I have a plan and I'm going on an arc and I'm taking people somewhere. And I love. And she had this passion and this zeal that I think sometimes we take for granted, especially when we get into the business side of our art. We sometimes take for granted that we have to let go of that, or that we might lose that. But we really don't have to. When we are driven by the things that we love, and we are driven by the things that move us, we will always find an audience. And that's what I really believe. And I was considering it, and I was thinking about my own life, and I realized that this was something I never really had to face up to until I was a full-fledged adult. Because when I was a child, I grew up in a house that was very much, I guess the phrase I would use is off the grid, if that makes any sense. Not that we were disconnected from power supplies or anything like that, but we didn't watch a lot of TV in my house. Most of what we watched was public television because my mom didn't want us watching commercials and wanting the stuff that we saw in the commercials. We didn't really listen to popular music. It wasn't banned in our house. It just wasn't what my mom turned on. She always had an opera, or she always had classical music, or she'd have stuff from when she was a kid. She just had very eclectic tastes. So that was what we were exposed to as kids. I remember being 8 years old and sitting down and watching Henry V and being fascinated as my mom explained to me what these people who were speaking English, but not really English that I understood, were saying and what it all meant, and finding a connection and a human meaning behind Shakespeare at 8. And so I grew up in a house that was very insular, and it wasn't very connected. And I don't remember as a child being super aware of what was popular and what was hot and what was new and what was fun. Public opinion didn't really mean anything to me when I was young. And because of that, I was really able to develop my own tastes and my own opinions and my own love for things separate from and outside of popular culture. And some of the things that I loved and that I discovered and that I found were very popular and are very popular now. And some of them are not. And when I was in junior high and high school and really developing my own personality and learning who I was as a person and what I liked and what I disliked, I didn't like all the things that the cool people liked. I was very much a nerd. I was very much a dork in a time and a place where that was not a good thing. Nerd culture has sort of taken over, but when I was a young kid, it was not okay to be a nerd. It was not okay to want to like sci-fi. It was not okay to go to see Star Trek movies. It wasn't cool. And I never cared. And the best thing was, even though I went to a really small school and it was a really small environment with not a lot of people, I still found my friends. I still found the people who shared my interests, who shared my passions, and who shared the same loves that I had for a variety of different things. And so I had my friends who would go with me to Broadway and see Les Mis for the 5th or the 6th or the 8th time. I had my friends who would go with me to the opening nights of the Star Wars movie or the Lord of the Rings movie. I had my friends who would sit and talk with me about Shakespeare or whatever sci-fi book we were picking up or whatever fantasy series we were reading. And we had these connections based on passions and loves that weren't popular. But it was okay that they weren't popular because we had that truth behind it. It was something that drove us. It was something that we loved. So when we were writing stories, it was natural for us to write a fantasy story. When we were talking about, music and singing songs, it was natural for us to sing songs that nobody else knew. We didn't care. It didn't bother us. And it wasn't until I became an adult, and it wasn't really until I started creating things for a larger mass audience that I really had to come to terms with the difference between creating for myself, creating things that I loved, and creating for others, and creating things that I thought would be cool or neat or popular or in the zeitgeist. And one of the things that I realized as I went on and created and wrote music and made quilts and wrote books and all the things that I do, I always say I'm not a particularly creative person, but I end up doing a lot of really randomly creative things in my life. But in all of these creative endeavors, what I always found was that when I trusted my gut and when I talked about or wrote about or created from a place that mattered to me, when I was focused on the things that I loved, when I was focused on the things that gave me passion and zeal, I always found an audience. I always managed to make a connection with someone. I always found the response that I was looking for, maybe not in massive numbers, but it connected with people in the way that I wanted it to. And every time I tried to create outside of my passions, and every time I tried to create in what I thought would be a more popular way, it always fell flat. It never went anywhere. And I realized it was because there wasn't any truth behind what I was making. I was making what I thought other people would like. And yes, this is, when I'm talking about writing music, or when I'm talking about writing books or things like that, those are things that, you can measure very specifically and put a value on and say, well, this is valuable because I can sell it for this amount of money and people will buy it, or people will rent it, or people will review it, or whatever it is. But I realized that even in the simple things like my Instagram account or my Facebook messages or, my posts on whatever social media, we have trained ourselves in this day of social media to put a value on our creation, even if it's as simple as a Facebook post, right? We have trained ourselves that there is value in that creation based on how many people respond favorably to it. How many people repost or retweet or like or comment or whatever. That's how we have learned to measure the value of the things that we're not necessarily even putting out for sale or consumption that way. We're just putting it out there into the world, and we expect to have a positive result. And the more people have a positive result, the more we think we've succeeded and the more value we place on that creation, whatever it is. But I think that that's a little backwards. And I think that that's a little dangerous. And I think that that is a mindset that isn't really healthy for us as artists. And if you're wondering why I think that, I think the perfect example that we can pull from the past is someone like Van Gogh. Now, I am not an art history major. I don't know a lot about art history. I know what I know. I took classes in college, and surprisingly, a lot of those classes ended up being on Van Gogh. For some reason, it just sort of happened that way. And what I always found fascinating about him was that he really wanted to succeed as an artist. He could not help himself. He had to paint. And he tried so hard to fit into the mold of what was popular at the time. He tried so hard to paint in a style that would be accepted by his peers and by his critics and by the consumers of his day, the people who would buy the art. He tried and tried and failed and failed. But because he only ever painted, or I shouldn't say only, but because he was always willing to paint and could not help himself, but was driven to paint the way that he saw the world, in a style that was incredibly different than the realist styles of the day, in a style that was frankly absurd compared to what everyone else was doing. He went so far out of what was common and popular and ordinary that he wasn't even in left field. He wasn't in the stadium anymore. And because he did that, he didn't get the response, that immediate, positive, overwhelming response that we all want, right? He wouldn't have gotten 1,000 retweets or 5,000 likes on Instagram or whatever. He wouldn't have gotten that because people didn't understand or respect his work at the time. In fact, I think the statistic is he sold exactly one painting in his lifetime. And granted, he had a short lifetime and a short time producing art, but one painting. He considered himself a failure. But over the course of time, history has proven out that he is one of not only the most prolific, but one of the most well-regarded, one of the most respected, one of the greatest artists that we have ever known. And it was because his art came from a place of truth. It was because he painted what he loved. And as much as he wanted to fit into the mold, if he had been painting like everybody else and creating art that looked like everybody else, we wouldn't be talking about him today. But because he created his art based on what he knew, based on what he loved, based on what he cared about, and based on what made him happy, I shouldn't say happy, but you know what I'm saying. Based on what he loved, his art has stood the test of time. And it is been given a value that is so far beyond anything that I think he ever could have imagined while he was alive. And I think that that really should speak to us as creative people, or as not creative people who are creating. That when we are creating things that we are passionate about, and we are creating things that are meaningful to us, it will always find a voice. It will always find an audience, and you will always find someone that it connects to. The danger comes when we take ourselves away from our own passions, our own desires, our own loves, our own zeal, what moves us. And we try to project our work onto an imaginary public and produce something that they will like. When we do that, we lose the power that art really has, which is to convey an emotion, to convey a feeling, to convey a truth. But how can we convey a truth if we aren't speaking from a place of truth? How can we convey a passion if we have no passion for what we're doing? So I say all of that, and this is not going to be a particularly long episode, but I say all of it just to say, hey, hi, I would never dream of telling you that you're doing anything wrong. If you are happy with what you are making, whatever it is that you're making, wherever you are making it, then by all means run and pursue and enjoy every moment of what you're doing. But if maybe you've lost a little bit of zeal and maybe your art has sort of become a little bit more like work, maybe it's time to go back and take just a few minutes and sit back and reflect and ask yourself the questions. Ask yourself, is this what I want to make? Is this what makes me happy? Where is my joy in all of this? What is it that I would create if I could create anything? What is it about this that speaks to me? And how can I bring myself back to making things that I love? Because when we make things that we love, when we make things that please us, we can normally trust that someone else will understand and connect with and appreciate the art that we're making. So that's kind of it for today. It's not a particularly long episode, and I don't want to keep you just rambling for the sake of talking for a few more minutes, but I do want to leave you with the takeaway, which is that you should always make sure that your art reflects you, because that is the most important thing that you can do. And if you have no idea what to do, make something that makes you happy. And if you're not happy with what you're making, go back to the drawing board and make something that makes you happy. Make something that you love. Make something that moves you. And if you need to go and find inspiration elsewhere, by all means, do what you have to do and come back with fresh passion and fresh zeal. Because if you're making art because it's a chore, then it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be art. It's not going to entertain the way it's not, and I shouldn't say entertain, but you know what I'm saying. It's not going to have the value that you want it to have. So I guess that's it for the day. And I wanted to say thank you again. Thank you for your patience. Thank you all for your support. It's been great to see the numbers keep pouring in. It's been great to see people leaving reviews on iTunes and wherever else you guys are listening. If you could take a minute, just rate and review the show. It helps us so much. It helps bring other people. It helps introduce the show to other people. It puts eyes on us. And it really helps, just spread the message. And of course, feel free to share these episodes with your friends, your family, somebody that you know who might enjoy the pick-me-up. And if you want to, you can follow me. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook at The Inspired Creative Pod. Or send me an email and let me know what you're thinking. My email address is theinspiredcreativepod@gmail.com. But in the meantime, let's go out there. Let's make things that make us happy. Let's go and make things that give us joy. Let's go and make things that move our hearts and our souls so that we can make this world a more beautiful place. Have a great week, guys. I'll talk to you soon.